Thank you very much for your introduction, Paul. It really sets me up very nicely for the comments I'll be making. So you have there what got me here on time yesterday morning, well fed, using cutlery, and nobody was worried I was going to attack anybody by using a fork and knife. And I actually showed up at the train station 5 minutes before boarding, which is not a privilege as an executive. It's a privilege as being a customer of Via Rail. You don't have to show up an hour and a half before or an hour before and get undressed or frisked or some otherwise examined. And I got here on time, relaxed, having read my papers, having fed myself, having had a conversation with both of my daughters, who are one in Kingston, one in Toronto, and doing some emails. So I won't compare that to your episode of getting here by plane today, but I'm sure it was not as enjoyable or not as productive. But I'll get to the details in a minute. So what do we mean by a culture of transparency? I just thought it'd be interesting to set it out clearly. So what we're talking about here is providing information on an ongoing voluntary basis, meant to inform, educate, foster confidence, and ultimately render account. So why is that a statement that needs to be made at the outset? Is that in my experience in dealing with government, both from within government as from in a crown today or in government in general as a citizen of Canada or any nation, I'm sure, the ongoing voluntary basis is fairly rare. And secondly, the second element is even rarer, meaning any information coming from government bodies that is not meant to confuse is surprising and rare, right? I mean, it reminds me, when I was responsible for communication in the mobility business, at the entry of new competition in the mid-90s, the communication strategy at the time, which led to the myriad of cell plans, was communicate and confuse. Because as an incumbent, if the market is confused, they stay where they are. And since we at the time controlled 65% of the market, the idea was, let's inundate the market with all sorts of rate plans, and you can do it this way and that way and this way and that. So at the end of looking at all these plans, the customer goes, you know what, let's stick with Bell. Okay? So it was a very successful communication strategy back at that time, and I think that's probably where I imported it from, was probably from my years in government. And ultimately, it means doing much more than complying to the legal and regulatory requirements to disclose or to inform, but actually talk to people in a way that is meaningful to them in knowing better what you're all about. And that's where I dovetail into Paul's insightful comments on the use of social media, because it is a game changer. I won't be saying whether it's a better world or a worse world. It's a different world. And like in every transformational change, it presents huge opportunities provided we adapt to that opportunity. So the case study of Via Rail. So the first one will be to answer Randy's question. So here you go, Randy. So coming from Toronto to Ottawa return today for this conference, if somebody was to fly versus taking the train, if I take into account that he's flying out of the Toronto Island Airport, not Pearson, okay, so I will totally eliminate taxi cabs in Toronto, okay, which is pretty generous because some of us go to Pearson and spend $50 each way, but I'll kill that right off the bat. So you got at least $40 of taxi, or actually more closer to 50 here in Ottawa, versus $10 of taxis if you're doing, or $20 in total if you're doing the train station, which is closer. The fares, the cheaper fare you're going to get on a, I won't name Canadian carrier, will be $460, plus or minus a few dollars, including not only transport, which is usually less than fares and fees and taxes and gas and whatever else. So about $460 will be the fare, and this is at the low cost of a $99 ticket, which is not available right today, but let's say $460. The fare you're going to get on Via Rail in economy is $200, or in business, guess what? $460. Similar. Then on top of that, you've got time, the value of time. So if you do the flight experience, and you have to get there an hour in advance, and you have to undress and all this stuff, put your shoes back on, you're looking at 3 hours, all in. from the moment you leave your downtown office at Deloitte and come to the Deloitte office across the street here, you've got about 3 hours in total time. If you do it with Via, right, and you include the cab rides, you've got 4 hours and 15 minutes, okay? Because we now have an express train since yesterday, conveniently, that does Toronto-Ottawa in 3 hours and 57 minutes. So you're looking at 4 hours, 15 minutes or so for the cab rides. So then the question is, what is the value of your time? Because now you can come by train, economy, $200, or $450, $460 in business. But in both cases, you have full access to Wi-Fi, you have full access to your cell phone, you have full access for room for your shoes, for your legs. You can walk around, you can go to a washroom, you can talk to your neighbor without having the noise of the propellers out the plane, and you are not dealt with like cattle lining up at the airport or at the ferry terminal, which is another great experience recently. So that's the difference. And so the 3 hours that you spend on that journey with the alternative mode of transport is as useful as driving, which is you can't do anything because you're not allowed to use the phone, you can't text, and as my daughters remind me all the time. And so whereas on the Via Rail train, although it may be a bit longer, it's much more useful time, especially if you're a consultant and you're billing that time. Then obviously I don't understand why you flew this morning, but anyway. So there you go. That's my demonstration, Randy, all right? So we were created in '77, and to run Via Rail costs $500 million a year, and we recover half of that through revenue, and that's because half of the train is empty. So if we all chip in, we'll recover those operating expenses, and half of it comes from government funding to make up the deficit. All the capital comes from the government. There's been no capital from 1990 to 2006. But since 2006, there's been close to $1 billion invested in capital to refurbish the trains, refurbish the cars, the locomotives, put up new side tracks to take the cargo trains out of the way so we can go faster, and shorten the trip times, renovate the stations, upgrade the Wi-Fi, yada, 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 which is why people are speculating that we might be up for privatization because we're looking better all the time and our deficit is shrinking year over year, and therefore we attract that type of attention. But that's a government decision. I have no clue. The three services we run, the main ones are the Ontario-Quebec corridor that I just described as a worthwhile decision if you are using your head to decide to come to Ottawa. The long-distance travel and tourism, which is the best way to visit Western Canada or Atlantic Canada, is to use the train because it goes into parts of those mountains in the Rockies or along the shore, whether it be the Matabele, where you see fishermen out there, salmon fishing in the spring and in the summer. It's fantastic. Or all the way out east, best way to see Canada. And then the mandatory services, which is the public service part of Via Rail, which is servicing the northern communities all the way up to Churchill, Manitoba, which is the only way to see polar bears in Canada. So you want to see a polar bear, you take that train. And we'll serve you a meal, by the way. And you can see polar bears in the October timeframe. And we promise to bring you back. So that's the commercial. So 4 million passengers, 3,000 employees, $2 billion in asset. One of the 10 iconic brands, yes, with Tim Hortons and Canadian Tire. Via Rail is one of the great Canadian brands in the CBC. And a capital investment program of close to $1 billion, and the more human way to travel. So our approach to public disclosure, first, know who you're talking to. Well, who do we talk to as Via Rail? Well, passengers, obviously, 4 million, hopefully doubling that up over the next few years. Commercial partners and stakeholders, which means anybody who has an interest in providing Via with services or products. The communities we serve, which means not only the mayor's office and the county office, the chambers of commerce, anybody who cares about the communities that they live in where the train goes through or the train stops if there's a station. And ultimately, the decision makers right up here down the street in Ottawa who make decisions on the funding of Via Rail and its policy purpose. So that's who we're trying to talk to. Our objectives, obviously, based on those target groups, is one, and first and foremost, to increase traffic on our trains, increase awareness of our strategies and our results in order to debunk mythology, whether it be pricing mythology or quality of service methodology, or Via Rail, the privatization issue, or the purpose of Via. Why is there a Via Rail? And what is the public purpose being pursued? So you have to share your strategies and your financial results so people are more aware.